July 19th, 1988. Deep in the heart of East Berlin, Bruce Springsteen, the boss himself, stands before a crowd of 300,000 wide-eyed East Berliners and, in rough German, proclaims, "I've come here to play rock and roll for you in the hope that one day all barriers will be torn down." The crowd erupts at his thinly veiled allusion to the Berlin Wall, behind which most of them have spent their entire lives. Some say the boss's speech was a thread that, when pulled, helped not only bring down that wall, but the communist structures of Europe. I say, it's all got the makings of a superficial history. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. What was the Berlin Wall anyway? Well, to understand that, kids, we have to go back in time, all right? Like way back, far beyond Disco Demolition Night or the Altamont Free Concert. We have to go all the way back to May of 1945. To the German capital of Berlin, which was, at the time, one of the last places on Earth that any sane person would want to be. At that point in time, Berlin was basically locked in a relentless vice, okay? To the west, the Allied armies are advancing, led by the British and the Americans, and their planes are bombing the crap out of the city, okay? And to the east, and this is maybe the more terrifying part, the Soviet Red Army is getting ready for a final assault to capture the city and effectively end the war in Europe. Now look, the Germans and the Soviets have been, for the past 4 years, involved in some of the most heinous and hideous warfare in the history of the world. The Soviets are not in a super charitable mood, okay? So if you're living in Berlin and you know this is coming, that's going to be a little bit scary, you know what I mean? Now, the Soviets know that the Allies, their allies, the Western Allies, are coming at them from the other side, okay? They're going to meet essentially in the middle of Berlin. And what the Soviets want is to meet those allies as far west as they can, okay? They're thinking of a post-war world. So they want to capture all of Berlin and get to the other side of it before they meet the Allies, because they want control of this territory post-war, right? So they're in a bit of a rush. Now, as I said, Berlin at that point in time is just about the last place any sane person would want to be. But I can tell you, for a little while at least, there's one mostly insane person still alive in the city. Yeah, that's Herr Hitler, okay? Now, he is far underground. In the Führerbunker, in Hitler's bunker. And he's down there mostly unhinged, okay? He's looking at big maps, he's sending out orders to defend the city to units that no longer exist. The big guy's got no real grasp on reality anymore, and certainly no sense of what's going on up above. And what's going on up above is that the tattered remnants of the German army, along with a whole lot of old guys and probably some children, are doing their best to defend what remains of Berlin, which is mostly destroyed, from the Soviets coming from the east and the Allies coming from the west, okay? Here's the long story made short. The Russians capture the city after a few weeks of horrendous fighting. Hitler commits suicide with his mistress, Eva Braun, on April 30th of 1945. And shortly thereafter, Germany surrenders and the Third Reich falls, okay? Now, a lot of people think that the Berlin Wall was erected at that point, 1945, 1946, right? Not so. Here's what happens, okay? Germany falls, the Reich falls, the war in Europe is over, okay? The war in the Pacific rages on just a little while longer. It's going to take a couple of atomic bombs to end things over there. Back in Europe, they have the problem of Germany, all right? You got the Russians on one side, you got the British, the French, the Americans, etc. on the other side. What are we going to do with Germany? Well, it's agreed that we're going to split Germany into 4 zones of control, okay? Americans get 1, British get 1, French get 1, Soviets get 1. Fair enough. What do we do with Berlin? Because Berlin is the capital of Allied operations over there. It's the center. It's the decision-making part of the whole situation, right? It's where all the action happens, but it is fully within the Soviet zone of control. Can't have that, okay? So it's decided that Berlin will become a microcosm of Greater Germany. In the same way that Germany has been split into zones of control, we'll split Berlin into zones of control too, okay? So the Soviets own part of it, the Americans, the British, the French own part of it. Okay, fair enough. That seems a semi-reasonable conclusion under the circumstances. Eventually, fairly quickly actually, the French, British, Americans on their side decide we're going to just unify this. We're going to make fundamentally what becomes West Germany, what becomes West Berlin, okay? And what that's going to be is a free market capitalist democracy in the Western mold, okay? The Western allies do not want a repeat of the end of the First World War, okay? They do not want a Treaty of Versailles 1919, which fundamentally created the circumstances by which a dictator could rise in Germany. Treaty of Versailles 1919 was meant to subjugate and humiliate Germany, okay? 2 important things. Number 1, the treaty included billions of dollars equivalency in reparations that Germany was obligated to pay to France, etc., the Western powers, for all the trouble. You know what I mean? This is a debt that's fundamentally unpayable and begins to cripple very quickly this sort of what remains of the German economy, 1919, right? Into the 20s. So you've got the reparations clause, and you've got, and this sticks in a lot of craws, what they call the war guilt clause. And what that says is Germany is responsible and bears the guilt for starting this war. It's Germany's fault. So what those 2 clauses do, reparations and war guilt, is A, it cripples what might be of a German economy post-war, and it puts a pretty hefty chip on a lot of shoulders, okay? And so you fast forward 10 years or so, the Depression is going on, Germany's economy is destroyed, Germany itself, fundamentally is destroyed, you got breadlines, etc., and you got them bearing this war guilt clause, and Great Germany is subjugated, can't have a military, etc. Conditions are rife for a dude to come along to say, hey, I'll make Germany great again. And that's Herr Hitler, okay? He comes along with the promise. I will restore Germany to its glory. I will overturn this bogus Treaty of Versailles. I will take our revenge collectively on the West. Mr. Hitler is democratically elected to office, kids, and then, through his own machinations, becomes the dictator of Germany, and so begins a whole process that leads up to WW2, okay? Allies learned from their mistake. So we don't want to do that to Germany again, all right? Let us create a free market capitalist democracy that can thrive. And if that free market capitalist democracy in West Germany provides a little bit of a buffer between us and the Soviets, that's not such a bad thing either, okay? And so they set about doing that. Well, on the other side, in East Germany, and therefore in East Berlin, the Soviets begin to set up a Soviet-style communist dictatorship, socialist kind of situation, right? And we all kind of know what that's about. And so what happens very quickly is that the Western side of the situation, things begin to improve. They rebuild what's been destroyed, which is a lot of Germany, man. And people are getting jobs. There's a bit of an economy. Things come back to life very quickly in the West. While in the East, things are dragging just a little bit, okay? Now, for the first, 6, 7, 8 years after the war, we have these zones of control, but you can pass fairly easily between East and West, okay? All along the whole German situation. And a lot of East people are coming over to the West, and they're like, wait a minute. You guys have like buildings and jobs and wages and stuff. We don't have any of that, and we want it. Can't get it in the East, can get it in the West, so we're just going to stay here, okay? And by the tens and hundreds of thousands, eventually by the millions, East Germans are crossing over into West Germany because the living is better there, man. We have freedom. We have freedom of speech. We can travel. We can get a job. We can raise a family. We can get a home. Things look nicer. We got nice Western-style cars. Can listen to the radio. You know what I mean? The living is better in the West. The opportunities are better in the West. There's freedom, man. And so by the tens, hundreds of thousands, by the millions, eventually, by 1961, around 3.5 million East Germans are slipping across the border and moving to the West. That's a huge chunk of the East German population, man. And so, the powers that be in East Germany don't like this. The powers that be in Soviet Russia don't like this. So come 1952, the drain is so intense that they say, look, we need to establish some kind of a border, okay? We need to stop this drain of folks out of the East and into the West because it tended to be the young, aspiring, educated people, the professional types, who are leaving the East and going to the West. That's annoying to the East because, for all of their faults, they do offer free education to people. This is a communist situation, right? The government controls everything. The government decides everything, but we'll give you free education, to boost the new motherland, So people are taking the free education and then splitting, man. The engineers, the lawyers, the teachers, the doctors are like, thank you very much for that. We're going west now where we can make a living and maybe travel to America. You know what I mean? East Germany doesn't like that. Soviets don't like that. So let's erect a kind of a border, 1952, okay? Make it just a little bit tougher to get across and get away. The thing is, you can't really do that in Berlin because part of the city is controlled by, other countries. And there's a lot of traffic back and forth. People live in the East, work in the West. You know what I mean? There's a lot of goods coming and going. Not so easy to seal that border, okay? And so those folks from East Germany who are thinking, I'm going to go west and have a life, can't really get across the border anymore except in Berlin. So they begin to travel to Berlin where, yeah, it's tricky, but it's not all that tough. You can get on a subway train in the East, get off it in the West, and disappear, man. And so the brain drain continues to happen, but mostly now it's going through Berlin, and this is creating a further problem, man. Long story short, all right, there's a ton of history here. One of the hardest things about doing superficial histories is deciding what to include and what to leave out. Here's the nutshell. The brain drain gets so bad by the early 1960s that it's considered a crisis, all right? 3.5 million people out of a population of what, like 10 or 12 million, something like that, have split. And it's not just, the educated professionals, the intelligentsia who are splitting. It's also a lot of grist for the factories. A lot of laborers have gone. You've got the situation in East Germany where there are not enough people to kind of man the factories. There's not enough intelligentsia to lead the country forward. Everybody's splitting. They got to do something about it, man, because they're falling behind. The economy is in trouble. The whole situation is not okay. And so they come out and they say, you know what? We're not going to build a wall, okay? That's not the intention from anybody. No one intends to build a wall, they say. And what do they do just after that? Overnight, August 13th, 1961, they start to build a wall. It was not 1945, it was not 1946, kids. The Berlin Wall began to be erected August 13th of 1961. And so you woke up the next morning and all of a sudden there's a dang fence. You know, there's a fence across the city and they're starting to put up barriers. And they're starting to dig pits, trenches, and they're starting to build watchtowers. And you woke up and you're like, my job's over there in the West. Can I kind of go to work? And they're like, 9, you can't go to work, kids. The border is closed. Yeah, but my auntie and my ma live over there. Can I just go and, No, you can't. You can't get across the border. They began to seal off Berlin, man. And so what happens is they build a wall, a fence initially, all the way freaking around West Berlin. Remember, Berlin is entirely within East German territory, okay? It's completely surrounded by East Germany. But half of the city is west, all right? And they build a wall all the way around it. And over time, this moves from being like a barbed wire fence into a full-on concrete wall, like 150 kilometers of concrete wall, with watchtowers and guards with machine guns, and they build what they call the death strip. It's like 100 meters wide, right, on the east side of the wall. And they cover that with like sand, right? And why do they do that? Well, a nice wide open space so you can get a clear shot at anybody who's trying to get over the freaking wall. And sand so you can follow the footprints. You know what I mean? They make it very, very tough to leave, kids. This is 1961, and they build this thing up over the next X number of years, from a fence into a full-on concrete fortress, right? Doesn't stop people trying to get over it. In the early days when it's just a fence, there's apartment buildings, right up against it. People are jumping out windows, jumping out windows to get across to the west, Then they shut down those apartments and they level that space and they begin to build a wall. People tunnel under it, trying to get to the other side. One guy steals an armored car and freaking just drives through it. You know what I mean? Something like 5,000 people managed to escape via the wall out of like 100,000 people who tried. And between 100 and 200 people were killed in the attempt, okay? This was serious freaking business. That wall was built to isolate West Berlin as much as possible. They said to protect East Germany from the fascists in the West. They tried to make it sound as though, West Berlin, West Germany was basically just a continuation of the Nazi regime. Got to protect ourselves from that, kids. So we built this wall to protect you. But people knew better, man. People knew better on the other side. So we fast forward just a little bit. This wall is up, it goes up in 1961, and it just becomes more and more fortified, bigger, stronger, more entrenched. It becomes the symbol of the Iron Curtain, the Iron Curtain that descended across Europe, separating the Soviet East, the Eastern Bloc, and all of those countries, After the war, the Soviet Union took control of so many of these countries, and established within them puppet communist governments. This became the Warsaw Pact in response to NATO. This became the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Bloc, right? Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, Hungary, etc., 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 right? And they called that the Iron Curtain, descending across Europe, separating East from West. And the people in the East lived under some pretty rough government situations, okay? No free speech, no freedom of movement, secret police, all this stuff. You know, we know a lot about what Stalin did and how many millions of people went to their deaths under Stalin, right? This is the pervading model. The government owns everything, the government controls everything, and if the people step out of line, the government removes them. One day, they come to your house and you're not seen again. This is, a nutshell, life in the East, right? And so this continues through the 60s, through the 70s, right? And tensions at times get very, very high. You know, the height of the Cold War in the 60s, Cuban Missile Crisis, you know, threats of nuclear war. This is a reality, man. The people in the East don't dig it, man. Now, to a certain extent, some of them don't even know about life in the West, or they're told lies by their government because all they're listening to is state radio about what's going on in the West, right? You know, but people are going to find out. And you get through the 60s, through the 70s, into the 80s. Things are, you know, things sind nicht so gut in the Soviet Union, okay? They got an arms race happening with the United States that is just draining the lifeblood out of the Soviet economy, right? And oil prices are falling, and so much of the money that comes into the Soviet Union depends on oil and that kind of stuff. The economy is what they call stagnant, okay? They are struggling to maintain a massive military, right? To counter the West, to counter the United States, to keep up in that arms race. Can't afford it, man. They do not have the economic infrastructure to keep things afloat. Something's got to change, all right? Now, mid-80s, along comes our old pal, Mikhail Gorbachev. Remember Mikhail, man? Comes in mid-80s, right? He's relatively young, relatively progressive. He takes a look around and he says, our economy is stagnant. You know, we are falling rapidly behind. We cannot maintain this situation, all right? The people are unhappy. The government is broke, you know? We've got a problem in here. And then to add insult to injury, Chernobyl happens. And trying to decontaminate and clean up the Chernobyl situation costs something like the equivalent of 18 billion US dollars. The country's already economically on its knees, man. We have a serious problem here. So what are the two words most traditionally associated with Gorbachev? They are Glasnost and Perestroika, okay? Glasnost, this concept of openness. Government controlled everything. Government controlled prices. Government controlled work. Government controlled the economy. Government controlled speech. Government controlled the message. Government controlled everything. Gorbachev comes along, takes a look around at how unhappy and, you know, fretful and angry the people are. It's like, we got to open up, man. We got to allow a certain amount of openness, and that was Glasnost. So some of your government ministries are going to begin to report on their activities, and you're going to allow a certain amount of freedom of the press and a certain amount of freedom of speech, all right? This did not become USA or anything like that, and, you know, you could argue that you don't have freedom of speech anymore in the USA. But it's beginning to open up a little bit, all right? And that is Glasnost. That is a certain amount of transparency in government, which is not generally the modus operandi of communist governments, man. And the other thing is perestroika, and perestroika is fundamentally restructuring. We need to restructure our economy because the country is broke, man. Our system ain't working. We are draining ourselves through this arms race, trying to maintain a massive military, and we cannot maintain. We need perestroika. We need to restructure. And so you begin to see some loosening of government control on prices, on the economy, all right? and some allowance of private ownership. This is not how communism works, kids. The government controls and runs everything, right? We're going to allow some private ownership. We're going to allow just a little bit, just a hint, just a taste of a bit of free market. Okay, we need to stimulate economic growth in this country. We need to allow, the economy and the people to do their thing. And so we get the Glasnost and we get the Perestroika, okay? And what that does is it begins to smell like change, okay? And people in the East want change. They want freedom, man. They've been subjugated for decades. Not allowed to travel, not allowed to experience or explore Western countries, Western culture, They want freedom of speech. They want freedom of self-determination. They want to be able to do what they want to do, man. And it's the same in East Berlin, okay? And the people of East Berlin are a lot closer to the West and what it offers than the people throughout the rest of the Soviet bloc, okay? Because they got a little enclave, they got a little slice of the West right on the other side of that wall. And you cannot help, you cannot stop culture from bleeding in. And they've had just a little taste of it, man, okay? Like in 1987, David Bowie comes. David Bowie comes and he plays a show on the west side of the wall, but real close, man. Close enough that thousands of East Berliners can come to their side of the wall just to listen. They can't see him. They just want to hear the music, man. They just want a taste of what's going on over there because they know it's good. They know it's good over there. Better at least. And they want a piece of that, and so they go to just listen to David Bowie playing. And you know how the government responds to that, kids? With clubs. That's how the government responds. They violently disperse the crowd. We can't have you listening to rock and roll because rock and roll is a decadent American, decadent British, decadent Western, insidious form of art. You listen to rock and roll, it could lead to dancing. We can't have dancing over here in the East, man. It's undignified. It isn't communist. Here's the thing, kids, rock and roll has long been the voice of subversion. Rock and roll has been speaking truth to power. Some of it. Maybe not poison. Maybe poison, maybe not poison. Rock and roll has been the music of rebellion. Rock and roll has been a movement against authority, man. For a long dang time, the kids have rallied around rock and or roll to speak their truth to power, to incite reform, to stand up together and say, we don't dig on this. We want it to change, all right? This is not new, okay? David Bowie comes. I think the Eurythmics came. I think Genesis came. But the Bowie thing is important because that's when they brought out the clubs and beat the crap out of the kids who just wanted to hear a little Western music, man. Let's move ahead to 1988, okay? This is when the boss came. Now, the situation is critical, all right? The Scorpions haven't written Winds of Change yet, but the winds of change are beginning to blow across the East, all right? Glasnost, Perestroika, the fraying edges of the Soviet Empire. It's beginning to happen, all right? The kids have had a little taste of Bowie, and they are upset. They want the West. They want to travel. They want freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of self-determination, man. They want freedom. And the communist government overseeing East Germany recognizes this. What are they going to do about it? So the youth wing of the Communist Party pops up and they say, look, maybe we ought to give them a rock and roll show. What if we bring in some rock and rollers, show the kids how hip we are over here in the East. What if they got in the West that we don't have in the East? We got rock and roll here too. And let's bring in the biggest, baddest rock star in the world in 1988, Herr Bruce Springsteen. Let's bring in the boss, man. How much bigger does it get than the boss? And we'll show the kids here in East Germany, show the kids here in East Berlin that we can rock and roll too. You know, we're hip, we're with it. You know what I mean? And the boss is a hero of the working man. And dang it, isn't communism all about the working man? Let's bring in the boss. He sings about the working man. He also sings about the ills of America. So let's bring him in. And he can, up the workers. And he can tell all the people that it ain't so great on the other side of that wall. You know what I mean? And so the powers that be are like, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's bring in this Herr Springsteen who hates America and ups the workers. Let's bring him in. Let's have a party. Let's placate the unruly masses who want out, man. Let's show them how good it is to be here. So July 19th, 1988 comes along, and don't the boss and the E Street Band show up in East Berlin. Now, the Bowie concert was very close to the wall on the other side. And that might have been a political move. East German authorities say, all right, we'll have a concert and we'll have the boss, but we're not having it near that wall, man. We're not having it in proximity to the West because there might be a freaking revolution. Can't have that. So we'll have it in kind of a safe zone further inside the city. And we'll sell like 120,000 tickets to this thing. That's a concert. That's a good show. And so all right, that's what we'll do. We'll have the boss. We'll keep him safe, away from where there might be some tensions. We'll let like 120,000 people come. It'll be a good night. So the day of the concert comes, and they set up the stage, and they let their 100,000 people in, 120,000 people in, whatever it was. But another 200,000 people show up. It's 300,000 people, and they just begin to walk across the barricades, man. Tickets or no tickets, they just walk in and crowd this place. And I'll tell you something, man. You don't storm the barricades in a communist country. Just a year earlier, they got the crap beat out of them via club for standing at the wall to listen peacefully. Now you're going to storm the barricades? Things are beginning to change, man. The unrest is becoming a thing. The anger is becoming palpable. And a funny thing happens on the way to placating the kids, all right? Instead of making them happy and satisfied that we had a rock and roll show, it just makes them hungry for more, man. And then the boss does something that reverberates through history. In the midst of what turned into a 4-hour show, he played 30-odd freaking songs. The boss doesn't screw around, man. If I'm coming into East Germany to give him a show, I'm going to give him a show. And this is Bruce and the E Street Band at the absolute peak of their powers, man. East Berliners have not seen this before. This is the full freaking show. 4 hours, man. 4 hours. The boss gets up and he gives the speech that I talked about in the intro, all right? He delivered it in German. He had it written out phonetically in German so he could say it. And you can go onto the YouTube and you can see this for yourself, all right? And he gives that speech. I've come to play rock and roll for you in the hope that one day all the barriers will be torn down. The original speech said that, the walls will be torn down. Decided to back off that word. Just a little bit too on the nose, you know what I mean? But he said, I came to play rock and roll with the hope that barriers will be torn down. And the place goes freaking bananas. Go onto the YouTube. You can see this with your own eyes. And what it does, the whole show, that speech, the whole show, Reagan had been there a year or so earlier with his Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech. The winds of change were blowing, man. And this ignites a fuel. This is a monumental moment for a lot of these kids where they have before their own eyes Western culture, where they have before their own eyes a glimpse of possibility. It could be this way, man. We can assemble together. We can listen to this music together. And if we can do that, why can't we cross the border? Who says we gotta stay here? Who says we can't go and live the lives we want to live? We want to go to England. We want to go to America. We want to go and see these places, experience this freedom, and have the lives we want. Bruce didn't placate the masses. Bruce fired them up, man. And Bruce did his thing and he goes away. And a lot of people, assign more relevance to this moment than maybe it's worth. Some people say Bruce brought down the wall. Other people say Hasselhoff did with his single. But Hasselhoff didn't show up until the wall was already gone, okay? Some people say Bruce was, can't start a fire without a spark, kids. Some people say Bruce was a spark. Other people dismiss this. I think it's kind of cool. And I think a lot of people walked away from that concert. You can go watch bits of the concert on YouTube too, You can watch Bruce's speech, you can watch him play the songs, and you read through the comments. And you'll get people who say, I was there. I was there. We'd never seen anything like this before, and we wanted more of it, man. That is the power that rock and roll has. To unify, to galvanize, to inspire people to action. Maybe not poison. The boss did that. Thank you, good night, and he packs up and he goes home. And these 300,000 people and an audience of something like 1 million or more watching via sort of shaky state television. They're like, we want this. We want this change, People begin to push the boundaries just a little bit. There are strikes in Poland. Workers go on strike demanding this, demanding that. And they don't get beaten with clubs. Whoa, we can protest now? And then there's a thing called the Pan-European Picnic of 1989. I can't go into all the details of the Pan-European Picnic, but the border between communist Hungary and Western Austria, the Hungarian government just opens it up, invites a bunch of East Berliners, East Germans to come on down, have a little, quite literally, have a picnic with us, have a little vacation down here in Hungary, and hundreds of them slip across that open border into Austria and disappear. And nobody does anything about it, man. The Hungarians are like, what's Gorbachev going to do if we open up this border for a day and just see what happens? And the response to that was, nothing, man. This is 1989. The USSR is on its economic knees, okay? Gorbachev can't afford the military it would take to prop up these communist governments anymore. It's coming apart, man. So he does nothing about the Pan-European Picnic. And then people realize, well, we can't get across the border to West Germany, but we can get to Czechoslovakia because they're like our communist ally. Our border with the Czechs is wide open, with the Czechoslovakians, is wide open. And so Germans by the thousands begin streaming into Czechoslovakia and getting themselves to the West German embassy in Prague, trying to get themselves airlifted out of there, man. And for a while, the Czechoslovaks allow this because they have an open-ish border and they have an alliance with East Germany and with the Soviet bloc and all that fun stuff. But after a while, there are so many East Germans coming that, like, we can't deal anymore, man. And this is the beginning. This is the crack that will bring it all down, man. It's like we don't have room. We can't accommodate all of these East Germans coming into Czechoslovakia. So East German government, do something about it, okay? Now what's going on in East Germany is there have begun to be protests, Peaceful protests mostly, okay? The Monday demonstrations in 1989, these are peaceful protests. We want movement, man. The rallying cry is Wir wollen raus. Wir wollen raus. We want out. Let us out, man. Let us go. Let us be free. Let us experience. Let us decide our own freaking lives. And so the East German government knows they gotta do something, man. It's like we have to, all these refugees are crowding into Czechoslovakia. They can't accommodate it. They're annoyed with us. So we'll ease that tension a little bit by semi-opening our borders, our border crossings to West Germany for refugees, okay? This is where it gets fun, kids, and this is where history becomes so strange. History so often spins on a little twist of fate, man. There's a press conference, all right? November 9th, 1989. The East German government is going to announce they will open the borders to refugees, okay? And they send out their spokesperson, a guy called Gunther Schabowski. And Gunther's going to sit down, and just before he begins the press conference, they're going to slip him a note. And the note says, we made some changes to the new policy that's going to allow basically free crossing for everybody between the borders. It was going to be just for refugees, and there's going to be visas, and there's going to be paperwork, and it was going to be a process, but we would allow refugees to go. And then they decided, you know what? We're just going to open it up. So Gunther sits down. You can watch this on YouTube. You can watch the whole dang press conference. Gunther sits down, and he's talking about these reforms, and then he's like, I got this new thing, and he begins to read the note. And the note says, we're going to allow free visits. We're going to open the borders. We're going to allow people to cross them. You know, don't have to be refugees. You can just go. He reads this out, and a murmur goes through the freaking press conference. Like, what? Like, what did you just say? It's like, well, according to this note I got, it's going to be wide open. And they're like, when, dude? And they haven't told Gunther anything. He's just a spokesperson reading a note. And the idea was, this is November 9th, the idea was we'll open the border on November 10th, okay? That gives us a day to prep the border guards on how this is going to work. Gunther doesn't know that. Gunther's like, I don't know. They say, when's this going to happen? He says, well, as far as I can tell, now. It's in effect now, as far as I can tell. And alarm bells go off around the whole freaking civilized world. What? They just opened the freaking border? Whoa. And news begins to filter. I mean, it's the lead story everywhere in the world, man. This is monumental. This is seismic. And so, word begins to filter. Dude, the border's open. You can cross. What? And people begin to gather by the thousands at the border crossings in Berlin. And even the border guards are like, what is happening right now? We have no intel on this. Long story short, saying that a lot on this episode because there's a long story here, man. The border guards have no option. They're calling the superiors as like there's 10,000 people here demanding to get across. I don't know what to do. They open the borders that night, November 9th, 1989. If you were alive and conscious and self-aware, you probably remember this happening, man. A flood, a veritable flood of East Berliners, through the gate, through the crossings, over into the West, where they are greeted like freaking heroes, man. Oh, happy day, freedom is at last ours. People begin to climb up on the wall. People on the west side begin to climb up on the wall, and then they're helping other people up on the wall, and soon you've got thousands of people on the wall. And it don't take long before thousands of people begin to destroy the wall. Go onto YouTube, type in Berlin Wall comes down, just watch the news coverage. It is stunning, man. I was like 17 when this happened. So for me, it didn't have, it didn't resonate the way it probably does even now, Now that I'm a little older, now that I'm a student of history, now that I've spent a lot of time in Germany and in Berlin, this is really, really resonant for me. I watched some of the news coverage in prepping this episode, and it brought a tear to my eye. There's a woman screaming in the face of an East German border guard. The Brandenburg Gate, which I have stood beside. The Brandenburg Gate is right there. This is a woman who's in her 40s, all right? She's like, I've never been she's hysterical. I've never been to the other side. She's weeping. She's screaming in this guy's face, and he's just staring dead over her head. I just want to see the other side. I've never seen the other side in my life. And then there's footage of them taking her across. And she's freaking weeping, and people are celebrating. And then the East Berliners get to the other side, and they're eating at Burger King. And they're in nightclubs dancing, and they're smoking a cigarette, and they cannot believe. This is how fast history happens, kids. 2 days before that, there's nothing new under the sun. And then by midnight on November 9th, thousands of them are on the other side. You see their crappy Soviet-era cars crossing the bridge or whatever, and people are welcoming them like heroes. It is seismic. The wall comes down, the Iron Curtain comes down, and eventually, within a year or 2 years or whatever, the complete USSR freaking collapses. And Bruce Springsteen is not solely responsible for that. But what he brought with that show in 1988, this sense of possibility, this sense of unity, this sense of change, this sense that it was within reach, man, I think probably inspired a lot of people to hold out just a little bit longer for that to happen. And then when you see how quickly the dominoes fall, it's absolutely stunning. And I think it's cool, the role that music can play in a movement, the role that music can play in galvanizing a people. It's pretty freaking exciting, man. And that's a superficial history of the Berlin Wall and the boss. And I'm amazed that we got through it. Dude, there's so much. There's so many moving parts to this. There's so many bits that I've left out. But I think it's cool. And a lot of people don't know about the Springsteen show in East Berlin. I didn't really know about it either. I thought I was doing an episode about the Scorpions and Winds of Change. But, the study of history can change very quickly, too. So that's the boss. That's the Berlin Wall. That's almost an hour of content for you that I didn't think I was going to be able to produce. So, oh, happy day. Just quickly before I go, dude, I can use your support, all right? I can use your ratings and reviews, particularly on the Apple Music or the Apple Podcasts. But, wherever you listen to the show, if you can drop me a rating and review, I would certainly appreciate that. If you enjoy these episodes and you think other people might enjoy them too, by all means, please share them. I thank you so much for listening. I've had so much good feedback lately. I very, very much appreciate that. I appreciate you giving me your ear for an hour, man. I hope you're okay. I was going to tell you about my show with Ken the Zen where I basically broke my hand playing cajon for 3 hours, but we'll leave that for another time. Take care of yourselves. Good things do happen when you put yourself out there, man. Go to YouTube and watch the coverage of some of these events. It is quite stunning. And hey, I'll check you later. Yeah. Born in the USA.